Okay, bottom of page 10. Basically, if you haven't already, put your other servo mounts on. Alright, as I said, I've already done mine. Remember, the outside of the frame has the canopy standoff we currently have. Alright, then the last thing to put on this side is your governor sensor. Now, I'm going to use a Spectrum backplate sensor. Oh, by the way, also put your bearing on. Remember, this is the outside of the frame. This is the inside. That bearing with the flange presses in that frame from the inside, okay? Don't put that on backwards, all right? Anyway, the outside of the frame now, this is your sensor for your governor for the magnets in the clutch bell. Again, I'm not using that, but I'm going to go ahead and mount it anyway in case I ever do. So if you look at it, there's holes all over the place, but there's two large holes, all right? And those go on the frame like so. And then what you're going to do is use these screws and nuts. And this is why they want you to put this on now before you bolt the frames, because the nuts go on the inside and it might be a little difficult to get down in there with a wrench. So anyway, let's go ahead and get this on and we'll get ready to button the frames together. Okay, servo brackets on, governor sensor bracket on, outside of the frame, of course, for the governor sensor bracket, which is kind of cool, by the way. The ones that are mounted on the inside are always a pain if you have to adjust them, but I like that being on the outside. Anyway, so at this point, you're going to take your frame with all the parts on it. Do not forget to put your fuel tank in now, okay? All right. Have this up here ready to line up with the bearing that we inserted on this half of the frame, and then basically you're going to just drop the other frame side on, okay? Line up that shaft with the bearing for that pivot arm, okay? And just kind of push the two frame halves together. Alright, so clear some space because you're going to want to do this level. Now at this point our frames are together, but we've got all that other hardware we put on the other side, and I'll take you through it, don't worry, make sure we get all the screws in the right place. But again, what I like to do at this point is go ahead and get your main shaft out of the bag. We're going to run that through the bearing blocks, and then we're going to put the screws in for the bearing blocks here. Alright, so go ahead and get that out, and we'll continue on from that. Okay, at this point we got the main shaft in. Make sure it slides in those bearings fairly smooth. Now remember, we left the screws on the other side of the frame, the ones we mounted the blocks with, a little loose, alright? If you need to loosen them up a little more, that's fine. So at this point what we're going to do now is we are going to go ahead and take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the 8mm with the fancy washers. We're going to go ahead and Loctite and tighten these up. Then flip the frame over, take out the other screws that we did not Loctite because we wanted to get this alignment, and go ahead and tighten them up in Loctite. When you're all done, make sure the main shaft is free in those bearings, and make sure those bearing blocks are all lined up. Let's go ahead and do that. We'll come back and review. Okay, perfecto. Look at that, nice and smooth. Alright, so once you got all those tightened down, you're nice and smooth. Now, one worry is, since we've tightened down these main blocks, we could have had the frames partially like this. So we're going to find that out right now by going over to one of the extreme sides here and basically putting on our landing gear supports, okay, like so, again, alright, and see if the screws line up with these standoffs cleanly, and it's looking like mine are. Same with the back ones. So I do not have a parallelism problem. Standing the heli up on the frame may also help you see that. If you do, and these screws aren't lined up where you're trying to tweak these standoffs, then loosen one side of the bearing blocks up here and let the frame float a little bit while you put these bottom ones in. That makes sure your frame is perfectly aligned, and then again double check with your main shaft. So I'm going to go ahead and get both of these. Now if you remember when we opened this bag, these were 10mm screws. So let's go ahead and get the landing gear supports on the bottom of the frames and make sure our frames are all square. Okay, whittling the screws down, so we got that all aligned. Again, double check your main shaft floats in there nice and freely, and you know you're good. Okay, we've got two screws that came out of that one bag that we robbed from. These are for, again, the clutch stack. We're not going to Loctite these again, so remember, just put them in, and for now, just leave them kind of loose because we need to adjust that clutch stack. And we'll continue on with that, and then what I'm going to do next, just to get rid of the oddball screws until we get down to those last little bit of 8mm and whatnot, is let's go ahead and use the rest of these self-tapping screws. Alright, you should have 4 left. All right, and I'm sorry, more than that. Remember, we robbed another bag, so you should have 8 left total. All right, plus the ones for the gyro tray and whatnot we didn't put in. So let's go ahead at this point, use all the self-tappers. So the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 for the servo mounts, 3 for the battery tray mount, and then we'll come back. I'm still not going to put that gyro mount in yet. I don't know where I want it, but so let's go ahead and do that. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 for the servo mounts, 3 for this front tray, and we'll continue on. Okay, so basically that uses up all our self-tappers that we had left over. We're basically have started really eliminating trays. We're down to this last tray here. And of course, if you remember, we robbed another bag, which was the motor mount bag for screws, so we might as well open that at this point and dump it into the tray. But anyway, what we're going to start to do now is, again, let's get the motor mount screws in, 8mm with the fancy screw caps, just like the other side, but do not tighten it and Loctite it. All right, then what we're going to do is follow up where all our standoffs are. So remember where the standoffs are. You can clearly see them in the frame, and go ahead and a screw there. We already did the landing gear, the one above the tank here. There's one up here in this corner, don't forget. The front one, when you put this on, don't forget your canopy standoff, and it goes like that, all right? And the one here at the front of the curvature of the fan, and that should kind of wrap it up. So let's go ahead and get all of the remaining standoff screws in, and we'll come back and review. Okay, there we have it. We've got, again, motor mount in but loose, clutch in but loose. Oh, probably tighten those up a little too much. Okay, maybe on the other side, but we want it loose so we can, as you can see, so we can adjust it. Okay, we got all the same standoff screws, canopy mount screws, etc., all in. Now, my bad. When I first started building, I did not show using the fancy washers on the landing gear supports. So if you saw that earlier on, you'll find you got a whole bunch of those left when you get down to these final screws here, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So, my bad. If you want to send hate mail, send it to Finless Bob's Wife at 666 New York, P.O. Box 666, New York, New York. Again, that's Finless Bob's Wife, P.O. Box 666, New York, New York. That's where you can send complaints. But anyway, if you forgot, go ahead, put the fancy washers on all 4 sides. So what do we got left? Oh, we got this little tiny bag with the screws and the washers that will be used on this bell crank arm here later. All right, put those aside. Again, I have not mounted the gyro plate. Whoops, I have not mounted the gyro plate with the self-tapping screws yet. All right, so we're going to do that later. All right, and then what are we down to? We got we got our 4 canopy thumb screws. We got 1 standoff. We have 4 12mm screws with these black washers. That's for mounting the motor onto the motor mount. And we've got 4 8mm left with the fancy washers. I'm sure we will get to those later somewhere along the build. For instance, I bet that other standoff will be used back here for the boom supports. All right, we still got 4 of those screws. We'll find out what they're for as we move along. I'm sure they're going to get used somewhere. Okay, so at that point, this finishes the build of the frames and the 2 halves. And with that, we'll continue on with other stuff. Probably get out your motor and do that next, and the fan shroud. Okay, but anyway, that finishes. That's what screws you should have left for now, and this is what you should be looking like. All right, hope that was helpful, and enjoy.